Hello, good evening, and welcome everyone to Platform, the lecture series here at Bergen Kunsthall. And for tonight, we are very happy to welcome back to Bergen Kunsthall Haegue Yang. Her exhibition, Journal of Echomimetic Motions, has been on view here for the last 2 months or so. Has been really very well received by our visitors. And it's now going into its last week on show. And this special occasion tonight is because we are releasing the new book that Bergen Kunsthall is publishing together with Glasgow Sculpture Studios and with Sternberg Press. Now, joining Haegue in a conversation tonight is also Kathy Noble, who has contributed with a new essay in the book. So I will present the book a little bit before I leave the floor to Kathy and Haegue. But first of all, I just want to briefly introduce Kathy Noble. She's a curator and writer based in London. She was previously head of exhibitions at Nottingham Contemporary and curator of interdisciplinary projects at Tate Modern, where she co-curated Tank's inaugural program. She's also co-created the performance program Tate Modern Live and the online program Performance Room. She is a writer and writes widely for magazines such as After All, Freeze, Art Monthly, and Moose. And we are very happy that Kathy could join us here also tonight. The book that we are presenting for the first time this evening, it's brand new from press. Actually, it's just a few advanced copies that they have sent us. But it's available to purchase here tonight. The book is titled Dare to Count Phonemes and Graphemes. In addition to Kathy's essay, it also has a new text by Ute Bauer, as well as an interview with the artist conducted by Kyla McDonald from Glasgow Sculpture Studios and myself. The book is published on the occasion of Haegue's 2 parallel exhibitions this autumn. Since mid-October, she has had 2 solo exhibitions showing simultaneously. The exhibition here in Bergen and her exhibition at Glasgow Sculpture Studios with the title Journal of Bouba Kiki. These 2 journal exhibitions, as we might call them, are independent production and in many ways completely different exhibitions. At the same time, they can be seen in parallel and they show different manifestations of Haegue's working process as they have been developed simultaneously and during the same time period. So the book that we are publishing now focuses equally on these 2 projects, as well as presenting selected recent works from the last few years. And one of the guiding ideas that we had for the book from the start was to focus on the aspect of artistic processes within Haegue's work. And I think the book somehow manages to reflect this, both in the 2 essays that are very individual attempts at kind of navigating through Haegue's artistic language, and in the documentation of recent projects where one can see strains of development, recurring themes of both formal and conceptual connections between various projects of these last few years. The book is designed by Berlin-based studio Manuel Reder. They have worked with Haegue on several books before, and their close artistic relationship is really evident in all of these books. They're all highly individual and unique works, where the design of the books are closely connected with the artistic project that they document and belong to. So for this book, a theme of rotation and movement, which are key elements in both exhibitions, are very interestingly developed into the book concept. Yes, I'd also just like to thank, there's a lot of people and that needs to be thanked in relation to projects such as this. First of all, I think it has been a pleasure to work with so closely with Kyla McDonald and Glasgow Sculpture Studios. I'm happy also that Kyla could be here tonight. This publication really comes as a result of what Haegue, in the book, she calls arranged marriages of art institutions. Also, several times Haegue has arranged these kinds of triangular collaborations between institutions, where the individual exhibitions are linked together in different ways, for example, in the joint production of a book. And I think that for both institutions, this has been a very rewarding process, as we have been given the opportunity to take part in and get a close insight into each other's projects, and then working together on developing these books as a kind of a third project in relation to it. I must also thank our publishing partner, Sternberg Press. For Bergen Kunsthall, this is, I think, number 7 book that we are publishing together with them, and also Haegue has worked with them before. So hopefully these relations will result in more projects in the future. I must thank everyone at Studio Haegue Yang for all of their work and the dedicated effort in this whole process. I'd like to especially mention Katarina Schwerent, who has been contributed enormously to this book. And at Studio Manuel Reder, I must thank Manuel and also his and Sio for their fantastic work on the design. I must thank the writers, Kathy Noble and Uta Meta Bauer, who have contributed with new, insightful essays on the work of Haegue, which we are very happy with and I think sits together very well in the book. And of course, Haegue must thank, who has been very involved in all of the process of in development of this book. As much as the exhibitions themselves, the book is really a result of her unique vision and approach to bookmaking as an integral part of her overall practice. So yeah, that's the most important thank yous, I think. And I'd just like to mention that the exhibition is open a little bit also after the talk. So if anyone hasn't still seen the exhibition, it's a possibility tonight. And the book is also available to purchase in the reception, and there are a few copies laying around. But now, Haegue and Kathy, welcome.
Thank you very much, Steiner. Our mic's working.
Mine is working.
Is mine working? Oh no, I haven't turned it on. It's my fault. Sorry. I'm technologically deficient. Thanks. Thank you, Steiner, for your introduction.
Still not working?
It will work. You'll probably see it over there. Good? Oh yeah, now I'm really loud. Okay, thank you, Steiner, very much. Thank you for having me here. I really enjoyed writing about Haegue's work for the catalogue. I've known her work for years and kind of was always interested in different ways, particularly her relationship to performance. But it was quite nice to have the time to actually think deeply about what my relationship to that work is and why you make it. But maybe we can go into that a little bit more later. First of all, can we start off with the show here, which is wonderful, and I really, really enjoyed it. Oh, slides. Sorry, hang on. Good. These are just going to run behind us while we speak to remind you of things Haegue's made. Yes, I loved it. It looked amazing in the spaces. And I guess I was going to start off with, because I'm not sure what the title means, you called it the Journal of Echomimetic Motions. What's an echomimetic motion?
I think concerning the exhibition title, I could talk about two things. One is the first element of the title journal. I think it refers to the time, which is very continuous in maybe everyday life kind of activity. And the second part is echomimetic motion, which is linguistic at the same time referring to the motion which might belonging to the linguistic activity. And the journal is also the common part between the two exhibitions, what I have prepared over the summer simultaneously. So these two exhibition preparation was going on like simultaneously. While I was physically, actually, most of time in Glasgow, I have to think about Bergen, and also where some part of the production was going on in Berlin. So there was this presence and absence with my own production, but then I have to be present in both thinking process, which is a bit confusing even. But at the same time, this overwhelming like challenge of like having very intense period of production at the same time is what I always enjoy, what I always also try to avoid of, but obviously cannot escape from. And I guess that was the timeline I was thinking about a lot. And the second part was also like connected with Glasgow, but also different than in Glasgow. Since then in Glasgow, I was much more interested in coming up with a different shape than maybe a sonic effect. And I think here there is a lot of sound-related effect that comes with the motion, and the shape we could see in Glasgow was also connected with the motion in some sense.
Well, I think the striking thing here, for me, and I'd seen images of the show while I was writing the essay, I knew what you were making, I knew the kind of backstory of these things. But actually, when you're in it, the sound and the movement are so much more visceral and so much more immediate in terms of your relationship to the work. The room with the, what are they called again? I hope everyone's seen the show.
Rotating sonic.
The rotating, yeah. Kyla and I decided that we were going to run around the room and make them all spin all at once. So it created this kind of kaleidoscopic effect that almost felt like moving painting. And that's just not something you get when you're looking at an image. So I wondered, maybe we can kind of go back to the start of how you conceived the show. And we've discussed a lot before your interest in Oskar Schlemmer's Bauhaus Ballet, amazing piece of work that was made in 1922. And the big room, I guess it's at this end, is very much based upon the characters within that piece of work, or the sculptures, or machines, whatever you'd like to call them. Was that your starting point for the rest of the work? Or
I think at some point we will see the work I call the dress vehicle, and I think that was the time. When I conceived the so-called dress vehicle, I had already the Oskar Schlemmer's triadic ballet as a reference in my mind.
So do you just want to describe the dress vehicle a little bit? They were an earlier piece of work that Haegue's made that were almost in opposition to these pieces. Do you want to describe them as how you made them all?
Yeah,
I can if you want.
Yeah, I'm not so good at describing the work. I am too impatient to explain, actually.
Well, they're large frameworks that are made from your coloured blinds to an extent, but the idea of the dress vehicles is they're not sculptures like these that are to be moved around. These are very much bodies. The dress vehicles are to be entered by either the public or by dancers, and then they're kind of moved around within a choreography. At Tate, when you showed them in the tanks, you worked with people to do certain choreographies at certain points?
Yeah.
Is that right? So they're kind of in opposition to these in that the body of the structures like a skeleton that's framing this human, whereas these, I think, for me, are much more the body's exposed and is the one enacting it. So that's a quick description, so you can talk about that.
So as you said, the dress vehicle is more or less just the skin or the dress. So one can slip into it and then wear the sculpture. So like one becomes a different character, which means one hide oneself, but one can also reveal oneself by performing it. So there is an overlapping of the role, the character which was imposed, but also like oneself. And I have thought about Schlemmer automatically because like unlikely to the other ballets, the triadic ballet is very much dictated by the costume he sculptured. so the costume is like superimposed on the dancers, while the movement was very much restricted. The sculptural narrative could be unfolded by activating it by the performer, or in this case, trained dancers. I was only assumed that even if the ballet was involved with a minimal movement, that he might have wished to work with a professional dancer, and it was confirmed by in this symposium in Dessau that they were trained professional ballet dancers, and it was quite difficult for them to have such a restrained movement. And in one hand, it was fundamentally prohibited by the costume. So like what they had to do was actually reveal the costume fully, and that is very ironical situation, and also concerning our very contemporary notion of emancipation of the body. And
will they become a form of armor then?
Completely.
So how did that relate to what you were thinking with the structures or the skins with dress vehicles?
I think the dress vehicle also manifests a very primitive way of walking.
Oh, you described it in a video you did for Tate as like a toddler walking with a frame?
Yeah, baby walker.
Baby walker, yeah.
Like as if we just try to learn how to walk in front of someone. And the primary movement, what is possible through dress vehicle, is actually walking forward and backward, or let the costume rotate. So there are handles in all sides. So by standing static, but then just rotate, let the dress rotate, you can kind of make a spinning moment, but without you spinning. And that was very efficient things to do, and there is also again this kind of rotation coming up, which is very, very simple movement, but then it's it also give a movement without changing the location of oneself.
So what led you then from this kind of idea of the body being framed in this skin to actually working quite specifically with the different characters within Schlemmer's ballet? If you can watch it on YouTube, if anyone who is now put on there somehow ripped off. Anyway, what led you to want to actually deal with the material in a very aesthetic way? Because each of the sculptures in here relates to a specific character in Schlemmer's ballet.
Like if Schlemmer, as far as I know, Schlemmer was very much concerned to find the material that is suitable to sculpturing the shape he was experimenting with, and mostly and primarily the geometric shape. But like he remained in a very, very crafty material such as wood, metal, and casting forms, and in my case, I completely abandoned that aspect of like his struggle as a sculptor in search for suitable material, which eventually remained very unsuitable to dance with because the costume became very, very heavy. And that was another difficulty for the dancers to carry actually the costume. It's not simple wearing, but like you were like very burdened by the costume. And I mean, I'm going a little bit off from the original question, but that was also reflected in other works called Sonicwears, which are a kind of wearable sculpture I produced for the exhibition in Strasbourg this year in June. And I think the climax of the Sonicwear became a piece of poncho when you put on over your head and on your shoulder.
And were the Sonicwears made out of the same bells that reoccur throughout this show?
Exactly, but just a bit smaller bells, and actually what differently than the sonic figures, what we have here, the Sonicwears consisting of the the ring, metal rings, and then the bells are attached to the rings. So they are really like armors. It's a flexible kind of fabric made of rings, but then the bells are attached that you can make a sound when you wear, but it's very, very heavy. And that kind of like counter costume against the movement of body, I kind of understood as a kind of different radicalness that we don't dare to do in our neoliberal society. That the lightness was the value and maybe quality we were very much aspiring in a neoliberal society, to transparency and the lightness. But then it didn't, almost prohibited us to become dark, maybe not moving, being static. Maybe static could guarantee the different way of focus and concentration.
But sorry, I was just going to say Schlemmer's ballet is very dark. I mean, it goes from this very, very light palette of bright colours to kind of slowly through these very dark periods to almost a bit where they seem like they're at war at the end, kind of like soldiers.
Maybe darkness, what I meant is a metaphorical quality of like being like illuminating ideas. I found, it is true that triadic ballet is primarily playful piece and looks almost pleasant, like a child, like a circus or how do you say, like kind of parade kind of feeling.
To an extent, but it does become quite menacing. Menacing. The characters at the end are quite frightening.
Yeah, the last figure called the figurine of abstraction. It's yeah, as you say, it's almost like a kind of maybe warrior of the world of abstraction. There is something very like dominating. But what I meant, again, like back to the darkness, what I meant is that it's fundamentally for me a bit enigmatic, that we don't know what this the Bauhaus theater was aspiring for. It's mysterious in the sense there were a group of people who were very much concerned about like idealistic utopian idea of avant-garde, that with the touch of didactic, they wanted to work with a very scientific way to improve the life and art and bring also together. But the Bauhaus theaters are much less didactic if you compare with the Bauhaus architecture, and particularly so-called the Bauhaus theater, which was physically took place in the core of Bauhaus building. When they built. So within the Bauhaus there is a Weimar period and then Dessau period. So the Dessau period is marked by a kind of exile by the Nazi, that they had to leave their central location.
Those are the dress vehicles we were talking about.
Yeah. The central location of the Germany, and they were exiled to Dessau. But then again, they could build their own like new home, and from the beginning they planned this auditorium, maybe slash. I think I can. Yeah, level down. So that was the place they made a like official presentation as well as an unofficial celebration. So every semester, end of the semester, the students were doing music and performance, and mostly for themselves, but also like with the invitation to the public. And there was a famous so-called the Bauer's Kapelle, which is a kind of jazz group, like free jazz kind of group, and they provided music and they build the costume as well as the stage, like so-called the mechanical staging. That is like you can roll and then something comes and goes, and so as well as the figure and the stage itself, it was a kind of machine dominating mechanism, and they were rather like a robot and like functioning, but it doesn't go anywhere. So in that sense, it is playful. But then what they wanted to break was this very high-end notion of like theater. There wasn't hardly any narrative.
Sorry. What then kind of, because you've returned again at different points in your work, you often go in cycles and return cyclically to certain types of materials, certain references, certain methods of making things, and the Schlemmer ballet and the kind of interest in Bauhaus seems to be something that you're slowly returning to again. Is that because you feel the need, you have a relationship with this thing and you feel the need to work through it? Is it an aesthetic thing? Is it I don't know, what
I think at the
what leads you to repeat?
I mean, when I proposed this room, which I ended up to call boxing ballet, the entire room with the 5 figures and the whole, let's say, set of stage on 4 walls, I was not, honestly not so sure what I was daring to do, but I knew that it is very daring way of working, because first of all, there was a huge afraidness from my side to do a figurative sculpture. Like no matter how I call like costume or theater, it has something to do with the figures. And then second of all, I think I was very aware the room will be very theatrical. It's a very counter-concept. It looks at least very clearly counter-conceptual. And third of all, my own relationship referring to Bauhaus and Schlemmer's ballet, I was not fully aware of. I think what I'm reaching now, also to answering your question, is I think it's a certain types of exhaustion I would like to reach. I think I keep studying what it means to me in the Bauhaus theater as well as boxing ballet, what I have done. In Schlemmer's piece, what I'm mostly interested in was the exhaustion of movement, that it became almost minimal in terms of movement, but he deliberately termed it as a ballet, and it has to take place on the stage with the public and done by the dancers. And I think without having this proper set and form and formality, you cannot really stage the exhaustion of the movement. And I think this very moment of exhaustion, I'm interested in. Coming back to my case, what I'm trying to maybe exhaust or make it exhausted is maybe the historical reference and also the idea of reconstruction. And I think it can only be achieved by like creating very actively. And so the creating actively, I think I was very much, in order to achieve that creation, I think I was very much relying on the material bells. I think that has a lot to do with this notion of celebration.
When did you first start working with the bells?
That was, in fact, quite long ago, without noticing. When I made so-called the light sculpture, which is one of what we also see here, the medicine men. Medicine men are one of those light sculptures. I was mixing so many different material and looking only retrospectively. I found out that the bell was first time used in light sculpture, but not in a great amount, just very little pieces. And then it reappeared again when I started to make a dress vehicle, because when there was unevenness on the floor, the whole frame got rattled, and then the sounds created, and I was focusing on that rattle moment, that I made a web of rubber cord, and the bell was attached that it get rattled, like when it gets shaken, but also people can actually grab the net and then let it, I don't know, like almost like a music instrument. You can.
Well, I was going to say they're almost like instruments. What's the kind of importance for you that people use them or move them, and is that relationship to do with what you were talking to do with exhaustion, to do with how we might understand those things if we actually hold them, or? Because I haven't really, I was in there just with Kyla and there was this two of us kind of dancing around with them a little bit. But I can imagine it would be very different if that room is filled with people.
I mean, I have a rather disturbed relationship concerning the so-called interaction of the audience.
Because it's something you do repeatedly visit, or you have visited at different points with different works.
Yeah, I think there is a kind of offer to interact with sculptures and works, but
I hate the word interact.
Yeah, I do the same.
Kind of sounds like you're at some kind of sexual relations or something. Anyway,
but also I think by too friendly invitation to interact with the work, I have a feeling I somehow make them less active, and therefore I'm afraid of inviting too much. And let's say I'm very less active in inviting people to touch and doing. I don't mind. It's allowed, but it's not actively
but you've made them
propagated.
Specifically to be moved.
Yeah. So when it happens, I'm happy. But when it doesn't happen, I'm not unhappy. Let's say, and I guess because maybe that's the difference between the real theatrical space and the exhibition space. That in the theater space, when the dancer doesn't put the costume and do something, that it doesn't get, the whole theater doesn't get started. While in an exhibition, I guess we can still metaphorically think about it as well as perform it by ourselves and get things activated. And I don't necessarily think that activation itself is everything.
But do you think it helps the viewer understand what you've done more?
I think they will probably understand what they are doing. And that's the point, I guess.
Unless they're just having fun. Yeah. What else did I want to talk to you about? I guess maybe we should talk a little bit then about, I was thinking, I didn't realize you had so many people in your studio until today, but your colleague
Not
said
anymore.
Not anymore. Your colleague said there was quite a few. How many were there over the summer?
I never counted, but like including so-called alumni, last time when I counted was 16.
16?
Like 16 meaning like whoever ever works in my studio.
Okay, because for some reason I really didn't imagine that many people. And you were talking a little bit about making these two exhibitions at the same time, but the materials and the subject matter is actually very, very different. I'm not sure if images of the Glasgow exhibition have come up yet again, but it was a huge installation of lines of different colours that kind of danced a little bit. They curled up and down at the bottom. And then a series of new works that you'd made, which are quite a departure, I think, from things you've done before, that were sculptures using your hand. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that show and how that relates generally to how you work and how you make, I don't know, there was a series of macrame pieces in the Glasgow show that you make yourself. I mean, you can do macrame, so how?
I think the labor-intensive aspect of a lot of work is maybe one thing, but I was rather more focused on like how crafty things could get and what that means in our contemporary time. I think the craft is something, when we call something crafty is differently than technical. And in Glasgow there was a gradation of from very manual, crafty and technical, and that the gradation in other words, like full range of different way of fabricating things.
Glasgow Sculpture Studio has amazing facilities in terms of ceramics and other workshops.
Right.
So yeah.
So there was a variety of material, but also the different range of way of fabricating things, which is very important and maybe something that we can't simply ignore when you work as a sculptor. So that was the motivation to go to the Glasgow Sculpture Studio and work with the different technique which I haven't done before. And like something like macrame maybe doesn't need to be in a facility.
So did you teach yourself how to do that while you were there?
Like I had a teacher who gave me the initial kind of lesson, but like from the second day I realized it's such a low skill that you actually learn by doing it. There is not so much that you can learn from books and video that you have to just do and spend time, like a knitting and crochet. And that was also one of the level of skill and technique I was interested in. The something happens in a real time, and it is maybe very...
So rather than using existing materials, which you've done so much of, you wanted to work through what processes were open to you there?
Yeah. I cannot even call it a process because it's so many hours and hours that, the process sounds, maybe at least to me personally, sounds like when the whole development get more structured. But the macrame making is so unstructured, it's too organic to call a process. You just have to just keep weaving and knotting and it's...
and something happens.
Yeah. And that kind of primitive way of working is of course function in art very well because it is something very precious what comes out of it. But at the same time, like I was also like recapitulating how much those craft lost its ground in our society unless it's happening in the art context, because like things are so much industrialized that the crafty skill became something too precious. And as someone who just start this skill, like I'm not like that skilled, like I'm maybe even below the usual maybe mothers and aunties in the neighborhood, and all this mistake and unevenness which you could see in the macrame piece, I think that was more or less very transparently revealed, and it is very embarrassing. But at the same time, I realized when I almost finished the piece, that was maybe what I wanted, and maybe what I even like
for it to be embarrassing.
Yeah. But not like me personally embarrassed, but also this embarrassment constitute out of the unskilledness on the way to the mastery, and I guess that reaches a little bit from this like the crafty work rewarded as like too precious, like I don't know how to put it in words.
And then in terms
rarity or something.
The blinds installation there, I guess you're very known for the different installations you've done using blinds as a kind of palette to paint with or a material to sculpt with. What led you to first working with them?
You mean very at the beginning?
Yeah. And then why do you perpetuate? What's it turned into for you?
I think I only repeat to work with certain material when the material gave me the feeling that it's not exhausted yet. That I just see my role as a sculptor to fully unfold its the material's potential, that I keep working with the material until the material maybe has nothing to unfold anymore.
Until there's nothing left to do with it, or it's exhausted.
So I have a feeling it's not just working with blind, it's just I'm just following up the potentiality of the blind. That's
what
the
drew you to
feeling.
them in the first place?
At the beginning, that was the motivation was having dividing the space, and each divided space, very hybrid activity going on, but then it's not fully isolated from each other. So the very first time I used the blind was 2006 in an exhibition at Bach in Utrecht, Netherlands, called Unevenly. And I had two so-called video essays and one installation where I put just lots of different machines, such as humidifier, fan, infrared heater, etc., wind machine. So what I was thinking at the time was while the machines, like the installation, working like silently. I mean, they are functioning but not talking. But the video are excessively like talking and providing narratives through like ongoing imagery combined with the voiceover. And I really wanted to have them at the same space, but the video have to be video pieces have to be a little bit dimmed space to see the images properly. So I divided the space
so
with
the blinds
the blind.
became a tool in
Very
terms of how you show.
functional way of.
That's interesting. And then you slowly they slowly turn into sculpture, dancers, all sorts of different things.
Yeah, there are, I think, very clear gradation how blind became an autonomous material within my
Well, in the Glasgow
practice.
show, I mean, I've only seen a short video. I didn't actually get to see the show, sadly, but it's like they're dancing slightly, and they're slightly different characters, and they each have their movements. And I guess the documenter piece, which I don't know if everyone saw it, but it was on a long train track where all the blinds were the same colours, but you choreographed them, and you were telling me it was 2 hours long. So the movement from beginning to end very, very slowly travelled down the train track. I kind of felt like it was a train leaving, but maybe that's just me.
No, that was one of the initial association that maybe the impression I would like to have on the platform in Kassel was that there is a ghost dance of the old locomotive on the train track, which wasn't there anymore. There was everything intact except the rail itself. So the deepened down the path where the train can roll in was there, as well as the platform where the passengers and goods could be loaded, unloaded. All the structures were there, but the electricity was not working, and so there was a dysfunctionality and the very strong implication and traces of the heavily functional place. And I wanted to work with this kind of almost spooky feeling of functional train station where primarily the goods were delivered instead of the passengers. And it also illuminates partially the history of the city, Kassel, as the hub of the German train transportation.
Did you choose the site yourself?
I did, yeah. And also it involved with the weapon industry in Kassel, as well as the deportation of the Jews during the Second World War. So there was also the decline of the industry, which we see in the city when you are a bit sensitive what's going on in castle. I think that is very specific to the castle, but this ghost of the modernism or the post-industrialization we could see like in a lot of different cities in the world, and that was the more or less the choreography and the dance I tried to achieve.
It was a very, well, I found it very melancholy. But
yeah, that is, I think, intended.
In a good way. I just suddenly remembered something I wanted to ask you about, but I never have. I was reading that the first show that you ever had in Korea, and you'd been living in Germany for, I don't know, 10 or 15 years, you had in your grandmother's old house?
Yeah, I think now it's ended. I will just put quickly into loop. How do I?
There.
I think the exhibition you are referring to is called Sadong 30, and that's the address of the abandoned house where I did my self-initiated exhibition, and that was right the end of the slideshow. Maybe some of you have seen, and I think I was a bit angry that nobody invited me for a show in Korea. No, I'm just halfway joking, but I had a desire to
return.
Desire to maybe sharing what I'm doing artistically. Because
did you study in Korea or did you study in Germany?
I got my bachelor degree in fine art in Korea, and then I went to Germany in '94 to study further at the Städelschule in Frankfurt. And that was '94, and the exhibition at Sadong was 2006. So that was almost 8 years later. Am I correct? I'm very bad at math.
Don't worry. It's okay.
And I guess...
So you decided that you wanted to work in Korea again, or show work, and then...
I don't know if you could maybe follow the feeling. I think when you are from maybe non-European or non-North American country, the contemporary art is fundamentally very Western oriented practice, and a lot of artists have a big success outside and then they come back to home, and I kind of dislike this process, but then again it is quite difficult without if you don't really make an effort to show always your actual development, sharing in your home country. And so my intention was partially that I wanted to share my actual development here and now there, not assuming that I could make a big exhibition later on, like retrospectively. And the other motivation was I felt very fragmented by having an exhibition activity in Europe that it somehow became very mechanical. You are invited and you conceive something, you open the show, and the roles are divided, and artists became like too lonely, that I wanted to have a very holistic experience of exhibition making again. So it was intended and part of the exhibition that is self-initiated show project in a non-institutional framework. And ironically enough, another condition I put by myself was having a curator who has maybe similar desire to work with an artist, but outside of institution in a very holistic approach. So as soon as I found a partner to work with, the project got on track very quickly. And it was a difficult process, but it was an interesting process that we both learned at the end that what really make the thing real is also the self-initiation of the audience who make the decision to visit this exhibition, which is far outside of the city center. It's actually, the house is located in a city called Incheon, which is kind of a satellite city of Seoul. So you have to take at least 2.5 hours to go there, and we only provide the little map and the code to unlock the door.
So there was no one in the house. It was just
there
your
was
work.
no guard. There was no institutional structure. There is no garderobe. There is no ticket. There is no opening hours. You can, in other words, you can access the exhibition 24 hours, 7 days per week. And it's your decision when to go and how to go and whether you really want to almost spare the entire day to go there. And a lot of people even couldn't find the house because there is no in Korea or in a lot of Asian cities there is no street name. So with this simple map, it's sometimes very difficult. You have to really ask people around to find this little alley that is, the house is located in really tiny alley that no car can enter, and that's the cul-de-sac. So a lot of people even didn't find the house, and once you find the place, you also turn on the light. I mean, you have to do all by yourself.
So you kind of, what did you show in the exhibition?
There were also a lot of quirky pieces that sometimes the illumination itself was the piece I wanted to show, and the reconnecting the electricity in an abandoned house, or which involves a long process of re-registering this address because
how long had it been since it was lived in?
What I know is at least 8 years. No one even ever entered the house. So it was very, very abandoned. Meaning, it was almost. I mean, I had to put the warning on in the backyard somewhere that entering the house was quite dangerous,
really,
because the ceiling can collapse. It was even a physical danger.
So did that kind of achieve what you wanted it to achieve personally for you by like taking yourself back to that as a place you grew up?
I think I overachieved what I planned. For instance, the Sadong 30 was more or less a test to myself whether I really had to see whether I'm still real, and that the project was made really to grasp myself if I'm still real, and how seriously I really take the art.
What do you mean by real?
If I just make a career, or if I really practice.
Okay, yeah.
But what I meant by overachieving was, I think through the exhibition I got a couple of encounters which became very significant to me, and some of them are personal encounters with certain curators and writers, but most of the encounters are anonymous. I had a feeling I learned the fundamental knowledge of the audience who I will deal with in my profession, that all those faceless and nameless audience, how much I have to believe in them. And so I never met with them, but I kind of get a glimpse of them through the guest book.
Okay.
And some of the pages I published in my Venice catalogue.
Oh, Okay.
And what I learned from the guest book was all those people who made this effort to come there, they came at least twice.
Really? That's interesting.
And they always brought other people.
Mm.
And a lot of family members. That was very interesting that they brought other family members or relative or friends, and it went through the internet a lot. So one person recommended to another and was blogged in from one to another. So it was very much mobilized, so-called by netizen, and there was a different notion of citizen, you know. So I got to know that it really exists, and they were all of a sudden very close, and they were not far or virtual anymore. But then again, their feeling were very nostalgic, almost naive, because they were not people who usually go to the gallery or museum. They were very untrained people. So
nostalgic for the fact that you were doing this in this building, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
A lot of impression of them were reflecting about home and their childhood and the family relationship. So that was for me, honestly, at the beginning, meaning right after project was over, quite difficult to acknowledge and accept fully. But even that became a very precious, almost a lesson, I would say, that I ended up to digest, and this very modest way of being close to the people, but at the same time very high demanding of artistic innovation. I think that through the Sadong 30 project, I understood the full range of where I need to be active and performative.
It's just interesting that you did something so intimate in kind of opposition to some of the more not spectacular, but I guess that is quite spectacular in a way.
Yeah.
Maybe, are there any questions from any of the audience? If not,
if there are, I have a microphone that I will bring to you.
no worries if not. I have one more question for you though, if there's none from the audience. I was just thinking, in the last room, the room that's furthest at the end, for those of you who've seen the show, the medicine man works with all the wigs hanging off the things, which I think are hilarious. But I noticed, and then I noticed this when I was talking to Kyla about this, that the Rites of Spring by Stravinsky plays 2 to 3 times a day according to Islamic prayer times, which seem why and how did that come about and what does that mean, and yeah.
I think when I played the music piece for the first time, I mean the Medicine Man was premiered in Kunsthaus Bregenz in 2010 for the first time, and this is the second time that I at least installed and show in an exhibition. And differently than the original time, I put the different rule when the music piece supposed to play, and the motivation behind this different rule was very much inspired by amplifying the hybridity of the Sacre de Printemps, the music by Stravinsky had already. I mean, why primarily I was interested in Sacre de Printemps was that it was the music and dance piece by Russian avant-garde, but who work with native Indians' ritual, which must be very exotic to them even, and showing that in the Central Europe's place like Paris in 1913 must be such an enigmatic combination of different cultural origin. And I think this very hybridity was something that makes the Sacre de Printemps like upfront of its own time.
Yeah.
And I thought if I use this music piece, I have to bring something that accelerates the cultural hybridity.
Heightens the hybridity, yeah.
Exactly, like, and that could be for me a further elaboration on what we usually call the like diaspora. When a culture leaves its own place, it becomes maybe lost, displaced, even alienated and exoticized, and that's the kind of interesting moment when the culture like talk to me like in a special way, and I think having this rule that is very invisible, but maybe once one noticed, then could bring a kind of puzzleness. I thought that is what I learned during the time after the piece was finished, and the point of now and here. It was a kind of update from my side.
From last time, okay. Thanks, Haegue. Thanks very much for talking to me.
Thanks for
Steiner.
listening. That's it.
That's it.